All right. Hello, my name is Paul Sevilla, and I'm a librarian for the Livermore Public Library, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to our very special program this evening, Abolitionist Monologues, When Freedom Speaks. I would like to thank Encore Players and ABLE, African American Body of Laboratory Employees, for putting together a fantastic program. And now I would like to introduce Jackie Martinez for who will be introducing the program.
I feel like you kind of already did it.
Well, you will
It's all right.
officially introduce the program.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jacqueline Martinez, and I'm a librarian for the Livermore Public Library as well. And like Paul said, thank you so much for attending our wonderful presentation tonight about Abolitionist Monologues, When Freedom Speaks. This presentation is with the Encore Players of Livermore and ABLE, so we're very excited to have you all here to watch this. And we will have a Q&A portion at the end of the event, so please type your questions into the chat box, and the actors will come back onto the screen and we'll do a little Q&A with them. All right, so now I'm going to stop my video so we can focus on the presenters. Bye.
William Wilberforce was a member of British Parliament who was crucial in abolishing the slave trade in the British West Indies colonies. He made 3 attempts before successfully passing an anti-slave trade bill in 1807. As a result, slave trade decreased by 75%. Wilberforce then worked for the freedom of slaves in Africa and the British colonies. On July 26, 1833, Britain passed the Slavery Abolition Act, which outlawed slavery in most of its colonies. Wilberforce is well known for this abolition speech, which he presented to Parliament in 1789.
When I consider the magnitude of the subject which I am to bring before the House, a subject in which the interests not of this country nor of Europe alone, but of the whole world are involved, it is impossible for me not to feel both terrified and concerned at my own inadequacy to such a task. But when I reflect, however, on the encouragement which I have had, I take courage. I determine to forget all my other fears, and I march forward with a firmer step in the full assurance that my cause will bear me out. I must speak of the transit of the slaves in the West Indies. This, I confess, in my own opinion, is the most wretched part of the whole subject. So much misery condensed in so little room is more than the human imagination has ever before conceived. I verily believe, if the wretchedness of any one of the many hundred Negroes stowed in each ship could be brought before their view, and remain within the sight of the African merchant, that there is no one among them whose heart would bear it. Let anyone imagine to himself 600 or 700 of these wretches chained 2 and 2, surrounded with every object that is nauseous and disgusting, diseased, and struggling under every kind of wretchedness. How can we bear to think of such a scene as this? As soon as ever I had arrived thus far in my investigation of the slave trade, I confess to you, sir, so enormous, so dreadful, so irremediable did its wickedness appear to my own mind, was completely made up for the abolition. A trade founded in iniquity and carried on as this was must be abolished. Let the policy be what it might, let the consequences be what they would. I from this time determined that I would never rest till I had effected its abolition. Let everyone regulate his conduct by the golden rule of doing to others as in similar circumstances we would have them do to us, and the path of duty will be clear before him.
Elizabeth Heyrich was a British abolitionist who wrote several pamphlets condemning slavery, her most famous of which was used widely in the United States as well. Heyrich was a co-founder of the Birmingham Ladies Society for the Relief of Negro Slaves. Although she was a strong financial supporter of William Wilberforce's anti-slavery movement, Heyrich was frustrated that women were not allowed leadership roles, and also felt that he was, in her words, too slow and cautious. In order to end not only the slave trade, but slavery itself, Elizabeth Heyrich organized boycotts of sugar from the West Indies. Here is an excerpt from her famous pamphlet, Immediate, Not Gradual Abolition.
It is now 17 years since the slave trade was abolished by the government of this country, but slavery is still perpetuated in our West India colonies. And the horrors of the slave trade are aggravated rather than mitigated by making it felony for British subjects to be concerned in that inhuman traffic. England has only transferred her share of it to other countries. She has indeed endeavored to persuade them to follow her example. But has she succeeded? To invite others to be just and merciful whilst we grasp in our own hands the rod of oppression? To solicit others to relinquish the wages of iniquity whilst we are putting them into our own pockets? What is that but hypocrisy? The perpetuation of the slavery in our West India colonies is not an abstract question to be settled between the government and the planters. It is a question in which we are all implicated. We are all guilty of supporting and perpetuating slavery. The West Indian planter and the people of this country stand in the same moral relation to each other as the thief and the receiver of stolen goods. The planter refuses to set his wretched captive at liberty. Why? Because we furnish the stimulant to this injustice by purchasing its produce. The whole nation must now divide itself into active supporters and active opposers of slavery. There is no longer any ground for a neutral party to stand upon. It is high time to resort to more effectual measures. The cause of emancipation calls for something more decisive, more efficient than words. What is to be done? It is abstinence from the use of West India productions, sugar especially. Small and insignificant as the sacrifice may appear, it would at once give the death blow to West Indian slavery. Great effects often result from small beginnings. Your resolution will influence that of your friends and neighbors. Each of them will, in like manner, influence their friends and neighbors. The example will be spread from house to house, from city to city, till, among those who have any claim to humanity, there will be but one heart and one mind. Thus, by means most simple and easy, would West Indian slavery be most safely and speedily abolished. When there is no longer a market for the productions of slave labor, then and not till then will the slaves be emancipated.
Born into slavery in Maryland, Harriet Tubman was known as Araminta until she was considered an adult at age 12 and given the name Harriet. She was married at age 25 to a free African American man who did not share her dream of living free in the North. Harriet left her husband and escaped to freedom in 1849. And for the next 10 years, taking 19 trips, she guided 300 family members and friends to freedom. Using the Underground Railroad, a network of anti-slavery activists and safe houses, Harriet was given the code name Moses. She was also a Union Scout and was the first woman to lead a combat assault. Here are some of Harriet Tubman's thoughts on escaping to freedom.
Slavery is the next thing to hell. I grew up like a neglected weed, ignorant of liberty, having no experience of it. Then I was not happy or contented. I said to the Lord, I'm going to hold steady onto you, and I know you will see me through. And I prayed to God to make me strong and able to fight. And that's what I've always prayed for ever since. God's time is always near. He set the North Star in the heavens. He gave me the strength in my limbs. He meant I should be free. There are two things I've got a right to, and these are death and liberty. One or the other I mean to have. No one will take me back alive. I shall fight for my liberty. And when the time has come for me to go, the Lord will let them kill me. When I found I had crossed that line, I looked at my hands to see if I was the same person. There was such glory over everything. The sun came like gold through trees and over the fields, and I felt like I was in heaven. I had crossed the line. I was free, but there was no one to welcome me to the land of freedom. I was a stranger in a strange land, and my home, after all, was down in Maryland because my father, my mother, my brothers and sisters and friends were there. But I was free, and they should be free. I have heard their groans and sighs and seen their tears, and I would give every drop of blood in my veins to free them. I was the conductor of the Underground Railroad for many years, and I can say what most conductors can't say. I never ran my train off the track, and I never lost a passenger.
William Still, Philadelphian and son of a formerly enslaved woman who had escaped to freedom before his birth, was a prominent conductor on the Underground Railroad. He is credited with helping as many as 800 slaves escape to freedom. Starting in 1852, Still recorded details about each fugitive he encountered, writing down their names, ages, skills, status of family members, names of slave owners, and conditions of enslavement, knowing that they would be critical in aiding future reunions of families who become separated under slavery. Here are some excerpts from those diaries.
It was my good fortune to lend a helping hand to the weary travelers flying from the land of bondage. June 22nd, arrived William Nelson and his Susan, his wife, and his son, William Thomas. Also, Louisa Bell and Marina Joyner all arrived from Norfolk. William is about 40, dark chestnut, medium size, very intelligent, member of the Methodist Church, under the charge of Reverend Mr. Jones. His owner's name was Turner and Whitehead, with whom he had served for 20 years in the capacity of packer. He had been treated with mildness in some respects, though had been very tightly worked, allowed only $1.50 per week to board and clothe himself and family upon. Consequently, he was obliged to make up the balance as he could. Had been sold once, one sister had been sold also. He was prompted to escape because he wanted his liberty. He was not satisfied with not having the privilege of providing for his family. Susan is about 30, dark, rather above medium size, good looking, intelligent, and a member of the same church to which her husband belonged. Was owned by Thomas Baltimore, with whom she had lived for 7 years. Her treatment was a part of the time had been mild. However, the marriage of her master made a change. Afterwards, she had been treated badly. Her master, to gratify his wife, was constantly threatening to sell her. 4 of her sisters had already been sold away to parts unknown years ago. Louisa Bell is the wife of a free man. She's about 28, chestnut color, good looking, intelligent, genteel, and a member of no church. Was owned by L. Stanson, confectioner. Her lot had been terrible on account of the continual threats to sell her. She had once been sold, had also had 5 sisters sold besides her mother. Louisa was obliged to leave 2 of her children behind, a boy of 6 years and a girl 2.5 years. Her husband, James Bell, is to come later on. Finally, Mrs. Maria Joyner is 33 years of age, mulatto, a fine, hearty looking, and intelligent woman. Left behind her husband and 1 sister. The name of her husband was Peter Joyner, the sister, Anne. Had not been treated badly until lately, after the death of her old master, when she fell into the hands of his daughter, who was drank and very abuseful, using great violence. For this, she was induced to leave. For 8 months, she was kept in private quarters, where she suffered severely from cold and
Nat Turner was an enslaved African-American preacher who organized and led a 4-day rebellion of enslaved and free Black people in Virginia in 1831. Turner believed he was sent visions from God, ordaining him to slay my enemies with their own weapons. And more than 50 white people were killed during the rebellion. The response to the rebellion was a massacre of 200 Black people and stricter laws restricting the right to assembly and education of slaves. Turner and most of the rebels captured were hanged. Here is an excerpt from Nat Turner's confession, explaining how he had been called to the rebellion.
Sir, you have asked me to give a history of the motives which induced me to undertake the late insurrection, as you call it. To do so, I must go back to the days of my infancy, and even before I was born. In my childhood and circumstances, which made me indelible and made an indelible impression on my mind, and laid the groundwork for that enthusiasm, which has terminated so fatally to many, both white and Black, and for a time about to be atoned at the gallows. It is here necessary to relate this circumstance, trifling as it may seem. Being at play with other children when 3 or 4 years old, I was telling them something which my mother, overhearing, said it had happened before I was born. I stuck to my story, however, and related some things which went, in her opinion, to confirm it. Others being called on were graciously astonished, knowing that these things had happened, and caused them to say in my hearing, I surely would be a prophet. And my father and my mother strengthened me in this first impression, saying in my presence, I was intended for some great purpose. My master, noticing my uncommon intelligence for a child, remarked I had too much sense to be raised, and if I was, I would never be of any service to anyone as a slave. To a mind like mine, restless, inquisitive, and observant of everything that was passing, it was easy to suppose that religion was a subject to which it would be directed. When I got large enough to go to work, while employed, I was reflecting on the things that would present themselves to my imagination. And whenever an opportunity occurred of looking at a book, I would find many things that the fertility of my own imagination had depicted to me before. All the time, not devoted to my master's service, was spent either in prayer or in my imagination. Several years rolled around, in which many events occurred to strengthen me in the belief that I was destined for greater things. At this time, I reverted in my mind the remarks made to me in my childhood that I had too much sense to be raised. And if I was, I would never be any use to anyone as a slave. Now finding I had arrived to the man's estate and was a slave, and these revelations made be known to me, I began to direct my attention to fulfill the purpose for which I felt assured I was intended. Knowing the influence I had obtained over the minds of my fellow servants, they believed and said my wisdom came from God. I now began to prepare for my purpose by telling them something was about to happen that would terminate in fulfilling the great promise that had been made to me. And about this time, I had a vision, and I saw white spirits and Black spirits engaged in battle, and the sun was darkened. The thunder rolled in the heavens, and blood flowed in streams. And I heard a voice saying, such is your luck, such you are called to see, and let it come rough or smooth, you must surely bear it. And on the 12th of May, 1828, I heard a loud noise in the heavens, and the spirit instantly appeared to me and said, the serpent was loosed. And Christ had laid down the yoke, and he had been born for the sins of men, and that I should take it on and fight against the serpent. For the time was fast approaching when first should be the last, and the last should be the first. and on the appearance of the sign, the eclipse of the last sun on February, I should arise and prepare myself and slay my enemies with their own weapons.
Harriet Beecher Stowe was an American author and abolitionist, most famous for writing Uncle Tom's Cabin, a novel exposing the cruelty and inhuman treatment of slaves. Some of Stowe's inspiration came from living in Cincinnati, where she was influenced by the differences of slave states and free states, with just a river between them and dividing them. Her book became the turning point for abolitionists and inspired many to join the anti-slavery movement. The success of Uncle Tom's Cabin inspired her to write extensively on behalf of abolition, most notably her pamphlet, Appeal to Women of the Free States of America on the Present Crisis on Our Country.
The providence of God has brought our nation to a crisis of most solemn interest. Of the woes, the injustice, and the misery of slavery, it is not needful to speak. There is but one feeling and one opinion on this among us all. I do not think that there is a mother among us who would ever be made to feel it right that her child should be a slave, not a mother among us all who would not rather lay that child in its grave. Nor can I believe that there is a woman so unchristian as to think it right to inflict on her neighbor's child what she would think worse than death were it inflicted on her own. I do not think there is a wife who would think it right that her husband should be sold to a trader and work all his life without rights and without wages. I do not believe that there is a husband who would think it right that his wife would be considered by law the property of another man and not his own. I do not think there is a father or mother who would believe it right were they forbidden by law to teach their children to read. All this is inherent in slavery. It is not the abuse of slavery, but the legal nature of it. And there is not a woman in the United States, when the question is fairly put to her, who thinks these things are right. But though our hearts have bled over this wrong, there have been many things tending to fetter our hands, to perplex our efforts and silence our voices. We have been told that to speak, it was an invasion of the rights of other states. We have been told promises and of compacts, and the natural expression of feeling has in many cases been restrained by an appeal to those honorable sentiments which respect the keeping of engagements. The warm beatings of many hearts have been hushed. Our yearning and sympathies have been repressed because we have not known what to do. And many have come to turn a deaf ear to the whole tale of sorrow because action was supposed to be impossible. For the sake of ourselves, for the sake of our dear children, for the sake of our common country, for the sake of the outraged and struggling liberty throughout this world, let every woman now do her duty.
Sojourner Truth was born into slavery, but escaped with her infant daughter to freedom in 1826. After going to court to recover her son in 1828, she became the first Black woman to win such a case against a white man. She gave herself the name Sojourner Truth, in 1843, after she became convinced that God had called her to leave the city and go into the countryside, testifying the hope that was in her. At the Ohio Women's Rights Convention, she delivered what is now recognized as one of the most famous abolitionist and women's rights speeches in American history. Ain't I a woman?
Well, children, where there's so much racket, there must be something out of kilter. I think that twixt the Negroes of the South and the women at the North all talking about rights, the white men will be in a fix pretty soon. But what's all this here talking about? That man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me. Look at my arm. I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could head me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as a man when I could get it, and bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children and seen most all sold off to slavery. And when I cried out with my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? Then they talk about this thing in the head. What's that they call it? Intellect. That's it, honey. Well, what's that got to do with women's rights and Negroes' rights? If my cup won't hold but a pint and yours holds the quart, wouldn't you be mean not to let me have my little half measure full? Then that little man in black there, he says women can't have as much rights as men because Christ wasn't a woman. Well, where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman. Man had nothing to do with him. If the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, these women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. And now they's asking to do it. And the men better let them. Obliged to you for hearing me. Now old Sojourner ain't got nothing more to say.
William Garrison spent his life disturbing the peace of the nation in the cause of justice. He was a prominent abolitionist, journalist, suffragist, and social reformer. He is best known for his widely read anti-slavery newspaper, The Liberator, which he founded in 1831 and published in Boston until slavery was abolished by constitutional amendment in 1865. As one of the founders of the American Anti-Slavery Society, Garrison promoted immediate and uncompensated emancipation of slaves. It was Garrison who inspired both Frederick Douglass and Lydia Marie Child. This is a part of his speech, No Compromise with the Evil of Slavery, and his editorial from The Liberator.
I am a believer in that portion of the Declaration of American Independence in which it is set forth as among self-evident truths that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Hence, I am an abolitionist. Hence, I cannot but regard oppression in every form, and most of all, that which turns a man into a thing, when indignation and abhorrence They who desire me to be dumb on the subject of slavery, unless I will open my mouth in its defense, ask me to give the lie to my professions, to degrade my manhood and to stain my soul. I will not be a liar or a hypocrite to accommodate any party, to gratify any sector, to escape any odium or peril, to save any interest, to preserve any institution or promote any object. Convince me that one man may rightfully make another man his slave, and I will no longer subscribe to the Declaration of Independence. Convince me that liberty is not the inalienable birthright of every human being, and I will give that instrument to the consuming fire. I do not know how to expose freedom and slavery together. Previously, I unreflectingly assented to the popular but pernicious doctrine of gradual abolition. I seized this moment to make a full and unequivocal recantation, and thus publicly to ask pardon of my God, of my country, and of my brethren, the poor slaves, for having uttered a sentiment so full of timidity and justice and absurdity. I am aware that many object to the severity of my language, but is there not cause for severity? I will be as harsh as truth and as uncompromising as justice. On this subject, I do not wish to think or speak or write with moderation. No! Tell a man whose house is on fire to give a moderate alarm. Tell him to moderately rescue his wife from the hands of a ravisher. Tell the mother to gradually extricate her babe from the fire into which it has fallen. But urge me not to use moderation in a cause like the present. I am in earnest. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse, and I will not retreat a single inch, and I will be heard.
Lydia Marie Child was an American abolitionist, women's rights activist, Native American rights activist, novelist, and journalist. She campaigned for equal female membership in the American Anti-Slavery Society and raised funds to finance the first anti-slavery fair held in Boston in 1834. Her book, An Appeal in Favor of That Class of Americans Called Africans, argued in favor of the immediate emancipation of the enslaved people without compensation to their legal owners. She did not believe significant progress for women could be made until after the abolition of slavery, and that white women and slaves were similar in that white men held both groups in subjugation and treated them as property instead of individual human beings. The following is from her pamphlet, written in 1860 to denounce the Fugitive Slave Act of Massachusetts.
I feel there is no need to apologize to the legislature of Massachusetts because a woman addresses them in view of all that women have done and are doing intellectually and morally for the advancement of the world. I offer no excuses on that score, but I do feel as if some apology is required to attempt to convince men of ordinary humanity and common sense that the Fugitive Slave Bill is utterly wicked and should never be obeyed. Yet Massachusetts consents to that law. Her legislature has passed what is called a personal liberty bill, requiring legal proof that a man is a slave. Show me a bill of sale from the Almighty is what she ought to say. No other proof should be considered in a Christian country. Massachusetts, with its free blood of Puritans coursing in her veins, and with the sword uplifted in her right hand to procure peaceful repose under liberty, answers, "Oh yes, we will be your bloodhounds. Only prove to our satisfaction that a stranger who has taken refuge among us is one of the men you have agreed to whip into working without wages, and we will hunt him back for you. Only prove to us that this woman who has run away from your harem was bought as a concubine, that you might get more drinking money by the sale of her children she bears you, and our soldiers will hunt her back. Shame on my native state, everlasting shame." Legislators of Massachusetts, can it be that you really understand what slavery is and yet consent that a fugitive slave who seeks protection here shall be driven back to the dismal house of bondage? For sweet charity's sake, I must suppose that you have been too busy with your farms and your merchandise ever to have imagined yourself in the situation of a slave. There are no incidents in history with more suffering, peril, and hairbreadth escapes than that of the American slave. No Puritan pilgrim or hero of '76 has manifested more courage and perseverance in the cause of freedom than thousands of instances by this persecuted race in the name of oppressed humanity, of violated religion, of desecrated law, of tarnished honor, of the moral sense of our people degraded by these evil influences. I respectfully but most urgently entreat you to annul this infamous enactment. I am a humble member of the community, but I am deeply interested in the welfare and reputation of my native state, and that gives me claim to be heard. I beseech you, let me die on free soil, for as sure as there is a righteous leader in the heavens, if you continue to be accomplices in violence and fraud, God will not save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Frederick Douglass was an African-American social reformer, abolitionist, orator, writer, and statesman. After escaping from slavery in Maryland, he became a national leader of the abolitionist movement in Massachusetts and New York, becoming famous for his oratory and incisive anti-slavery writings before and during the Civil War. He taught himself to read and write and helped other slaves become literate. As part of the Equal Rights Party in 1872, Douglass was nominated as a vice presidential candidate, but he did not accept the nomination as it was made without his consent. The following came from his keynote address at an Independence Day celebration in Rochester, New York, where he was asked, "What to the slave is the 4th of July?"
Fellow citizens, I am not wanting in respect for the fathers of this republic The signers of the Declaration of Independence were brave and great men. They were statesmen, patriots, and heroes. And for the good they did and the principles they contended for, I will unite with you to honor their memory. They loved their country better than their own private interests. And though this is not the highest form of human excellence, all will concede that it is a rare virtue and that when it is exhibited, it ought to command respect. Your fathers staked their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor on the cause of their country. In their admiration of liberty, they lost sight of all other interests. They were peace men, but they preferred revolution to peace, submission to bondage. They were quiet men, but they did not shrink from agitating against oppression. They showed forbearance, but that they knew its limits. They believed in order, but not in the order of tyranny. With them, nothing was settled that was not right. With them, justice, liberty, and humanity were final, not slavery and oppression. You may well cherish the memory of such men. They were great in their day and generation. Their solid manhood stands out the more as we contrast it with these degenerate times. Fellow citizens, pardon me, allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I or those I represent to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? Am I therefore called upon to bring our humble offerings to the national altar and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence to us? I say it with a sad sense of disparity between us. I am not included with the pale, glorious anniversary. Your independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought light and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. The 4th of July is yours, not mine. You must rejoice, but I must mourn.
Thank you. Thank you to the Encore players and to Abel and to Paul for doing the slideshow. That was wonderful. Thank you so much for this presentation. I'd like to invite all of the performers on screen for a Q&A portion of the show. If you have any questions or comments, please type them in the chat right now. Thank you.
I need the host to start my video.
Let's see.
I'm getting a message that says you can't start your video because the host has stopped
Oh,
I'll go ahead and see if I can get that.
Huh.
Did that work?
Oh.
There we go. All right. Several people have said thank you in the comments. Yes. That was wonderful. Very inspiring and moving. So thank you to all the